and today we are going to be talking about the 2010 mystery thriller film called Buried, directed by Rodrigo Cortés. So, without further ado, let's jump in. In 2006, Paul Conroy woke up to find himself buried alive, bound and gagged in a wooden coffin. In confusion and fear, he removes the cloth that was used to gag him from his mouth and starts screaming for help, but he soon realizes that it's no use. He manages to free his bound hands with the help of one of the nails in the coffin, and then checks his pockets and the coffin to see what he can find. He finds a Zippo lighter, a pen, and a BlackBerry phone with him in the coffin. Though he initially has no idea as to how he got there, he gradually begins to piece together what happened to him. He recalls that while driving as usual, some kids started throwing stones at their trucks, after which he and several other convoys were ambushed by terrorists. All the other truck drivers were killed shortly before he blacked out after being hit by a rock. Using the phone he found in his pocket, Paul attempts to contact his employers, who had given him a safety number to reach if anything like this should happen to him. But the call goes straight to voicemail, and he is only able to leave a message for them. He then tries to contact his wife, but she also does not pick up, and he is only able to leave a message for her as well. Paul is then able to contact the FBI, but they cut off before he can explain the situation. However, he is able to determine that he has been kidnapped for money. After some time, he receives a call from his kidnapper, Jabir, demanding that he pay a ransom of $5 million or he will be left in the coffin to die. Paul pleads with him and tries to convince him that he has nothing to do with the American soldiers and he was only there for work. But the kidnapper does not budge and keeps saying that just because of his citizenship, he is an enemy to them. Paul eventually gets into contact with the State Department, which tells him that due to the government policy of non-negotiation with terrorists, it cannot pay the ransom but will try its best to rescue him. The State Department tells him not to contact the news at any cost and then passes him onto a group set up in 2004 specifically made to help people who have been kidnapped. The man he is forwarded to, Dan Brenner, tells Paul to look for any information he can find to determine where he is and where his coffin is buried. During this call, the kidnapper again contacts Paul and tells him to make a ransom video using a camera that he placed near his foot. He tells him that he has to read the script they put in with the camera in the ransom video. Paul tells the kidnapper that he is not important and the embassy would not pay $5 million for him. The kidnapper then agrees to take $1 million to release him, telling him that he has until 9 p.m. to get the money sent to them. Though it's difficult for him to move in the small coffin that restricts most of his movements, Paul is able to grab the bag placed near his foot, in which, along with the script for the video, he finds a malfunctioning flashlight, a glow stick, and a flask with alcohol, and a pocket knife. Paul then calls Dan Brenner again and gives him the kidnapper's number to help them trace him. Brenner tells him that they are doing their best to find him, but Paul is not convinced and asks the man to name a person they have saved before. Dan claims his team saved a man known as Mark White, who was a medical student put in the same condition as Paul 3 weeks ago. They tell him that he is now back home safe and Paul will be as well. Paul then calls his mother, who is in a nursing home, but she barely remembers him due to severe dementia. He keeps talking to her for some time, giving her hints to remind her about himself, and then hangs up. Unable to hold his tears back, Jabir, the kidnapper, then calls Paul again and demands he film the ransom video, sending him a photo of his colleague, Pamela, gagged with a gun to her head, saying they would shoot her to death if he does not comply. Paul pleads with him not to hurt her, saying she has a family and kids waiting for her back home. The kidnapper then demands he make and send him the video in 3 minutes. He then makes the video in the light of his flashlight and sends it back to Jabir. Later, while laying in the coffin in the dark, Paul finds a snake in the coffin, slithering down his leg. Paul lays there, petrified, as he observes the snake in the light of the glow stick. He throws some of the alcohol from the flask he had towards the snake, and then he throws a burning lighter at it. The area around the snake starts to burn, and it goes out the coffin through a hole in the wooden crate. Paul accidentally drops a flask with the alcohol while the area is still burning, and the alcohol slowly starts to flow towards the fire. Before the fire spreads in the coffin though, he manages to extinguish it by throwing sand on it. Looking through his phone, Paul manages to switch the language to English. He then finds the phone's number, which was otherwise not available at the other end, and relays it to his wife in a voicemail. He then receives a video and finds out that though he had recorded and sent the ransom video, the kidnappers executed Pamela anyway, despite her pleading and imploring. Watching this video disturbs him to such an extent that he puts a pocket knife to his throat and starts to push it down into his skin. But then he thinks about the voice of his child that he heard through the voicemail and puts the knife away. He then gets a call with Brenner and tells him that he thinks they're not going to do anything to help him and are just going to let him die. Just as they did nothing to save Pamela, Brenner tells him to stay strong and tells him that he is upset with him for making the video, which is now being played on all major networks and has received numerous views on YouTube. Paul tells Brenner that he believes he's buried near a mosque as he heard the call for prayer. Brenner tells him that the rescue team is then very close to finding him. During this call, Paul feels the ground shaking and realizes that explosions are occurring in a nearby area. The explosions then start to violently shake the ground and damage his coffin, causing it to slowly fill with sand. Paul then receives a call from his employer's legal counsel from the company he works with in Iraq, the CRT. He then asks Paul not to speak with anyone in order to keep the situation contained. Paul starts to yell at him for not caring about their employees, but only their own necks. Instead of sympathizing with him or trying to help him, his employer begins to record the call and informs him that he has been retroactively terminated from his job earlier that same day, conveniently before his capture, due to an alleged prohibited relationship with Pamela Luti, the colleague who had just been executed by the terrorists. Because of this, his company refuses to take any responsibility for his capture and tells him that he and his family also will not be entitled to any benefits or pension earned with the company. Brenner then calls saying that the explosions that damaged his coffin earlier were in fact F-16 bombings and that his kidnappers have all been killed. Paul tells them that if they have been killed, no one knows where he's buried. Brenner says he can try to track the signals, but Paul says they already tried that and failed. He then loses hope completely, as Brenner also plainly tells him that it is over, and he wishes it could have been done differently. He then makes a video as his last will and testament, leaving his wife his personal savings and his son his clothes, saying he wishes he had more time to give him. He ends the video and then grabs his lighter, putting it on top of his chest, watching the flickering flame as it slowly extinguishes. Jabir then calls him again and asks for the ransom money. Paul tells him that he was not able to get it, but if he is set free, he can give it to them. Jabir tells him to show blood, saying it will make his people speed things up and send the money. He orders him to cut one of his fingers, but Paul refuses to do so. Jabir then asks him about his wife and children. Paul says that he does indeed have a family and wants to return to them. Jabir again orders him to cut a finger and reveals his home address to him, telling him he needs to show blood or else his family will. After the call ends, Paul again tries to reach his wife's phone, but just like all the previous attempts, it goes straight to voicemail. He leaves her a message telling her not to go home at any cost and go somewhere else with his son for safety. He attempts to reach Brenner and tell him that the kidnappers has still not died, but is not able to. Worried about his wife and child back home, he stuffs a cloth in his mouth and starts filming as he puts a pocket knife to his finger in front of the camera, slicing off his finger, wailing in pain. Shortly after filming the video, his cell phone rings and Paul begins to hear digging and distorted sounds. The sounds become clearer, saying to open the coffin, and the coffin opens. It abruptly becomes obvious that he hallucinated the encounter and is still buried. Brenner then calls him and tells him that an insurgent has given details to where to find a man buried alive in exchange for his freedom. He tells him that they have almost found him and are driving out to rescue him. Paul then receives a tearful call from his wife, Linda, who asks him where he is and if he's okay. She tells him that she had left her phone at home and rushed back as soon as she found out about him in the news. He assures her that he's going to be okay and will be back home with her soon. As sand continues to fill the coffin to dangerous levels, giving Paul seconds left to live, Brenner calls and tells him that he and the rescue team have arrived at the burial site. Through the phone, digging is heard and he tries to stay strong, telling himself that it's almost over. The team digs and finds a coffin, but it's revealed that the insurgent led them to Mark White's coffin, the man Brenner claimed had been rescued. The film ends with Brenner profusely apologizing to Paul as the sand finally fills the coffin and he suffocates as the lights go out and the screen goes black. In the post-credit scene, a light illuminates the name Mark White on the lid of the coffin, written by Paul earlier.